You are looking live at the flight deck of the Leonardo MD-80. Hey everybody, CJ here. I'm your classic jet sim pilot. And today we're going to do something a little different. I'm going to start producing some videos every now and again that cover something very specific. I'm going to call it finer points. And rather than just the typical point A to point B type of flight in one of the classic jets, I'm going to pick a topic that I think could be valuable, or something that I learned about recently, or just something with a little bit more of a finer point on it. Thus the name, Finer Points. And we'll dive deep into the subject. And if you hopefully it'll help your online flying and help you fit in better, work better in a VAT sim type environment, especially. That's what kind of brought this one up. And then I found some training materials to support it. So, yeah. So this is our first installment of that. Although there's no order to them, so I'll have them listed on the channel in their own folder, and folks can go in and choose whichever ones they like. So, yeah. Make sure you leave me a comment about if there's something specific you want to learn more about. It could be flying technique, could be real-world operations technique. It could be instrument approaches, interesting instrument approaches. I know I'd like to do a couple of those. So, excuse me. So yeah, that's what we're going to do. And before we get started, give me a like and a subscribe, would you? The like helps me understand what kind of content you all like to see. And, of course, the subscribe will allow you to be notified, and click that notification bell will allow you to be notified when I put something new out. So, yeah, without further ado, let's talk about autoflight on the MD-80. So we spend most of our lives, whether it's the MD-80 or another aircraft, right, in some sort of nav mode and some sort of VNAV mode, which is fine. Like right now, I'm in a VNAV mode. And that's great, but there are occasions when we need to come out of that VNAV mode and operate the autopilot a little bit more manually. And so that's what I want to talk about today, because that can be difficult for sim pilots, well, even for real-world pilots in the MD-80, to get used to how the autoflight system works. But what I'm going to cover today could easily be transcribed across all different types of aircraft, not just transport category, but also right down to general aviation aircraft. There are commonalities. I will say some of the terminology is different. So, you know, right, one of the really fun things about flight simming is you get to fly all sorts of different types of aircraft, right? It's not like in the real world where you're typically assigned you're on one piece of equipment, and that's what you fly day in, day out. We hop around a lot, and I hop around a lot. So even though I am a former airline pilot, I am not type rated in the MD-80. So a lot of my knowledge from the MD-80 has come from real-world operations, from crew operating manuals, flight training manuals, things like that. And in fact, this training today came right out of a real-world training scenario that was distributed, I assume as part of maybe a recurrent training, but I thought it was a good one. So the terminology can be different amongst different manufacturers, so try not to get too hung up on that. And if I drift from McDonnell Douglas terminology into Boeing or into Airbus, I apologize. I'm going to try not to do that to keep this as clear as possible. But let's get into the autoflight system. So the autoflight system in the MD-80 consists of, well, the overall system is called the Digital Flight Guidance System, the DFGS. So if you hear the acronym DFGS, you know they're talking about the entirety of the system that provides autoflight. The DFGS consists of 2 digital flight guidance computers. And then the pilots control automatic flight through the mode control panel, which is this panel here on the overhead, on the glare shield. In between the nav radios. So from here to here, this is the mode control panel. We also control autoflight through the FMS, which is accessed through the MCDU, the multifunction control display unit. So today we'll focus primarily on the mode control panel, but we'll talk about some techniques regarding the MCDU. The other components of the autoflight system, the DFGS, are the auto throttles and also the flight directors. So again, we're going to focus on sort of basic MCP inputs and what it means for the aircraft. Now, sort of important note, when the autopilot is engaged, as it is right now, it follows the command of the digital flight guidance computer that is selected, number 1 or number 2. And this is where you select it, right? Number 1 and number 2. Typically when the captain is flying, you're on DFGC 1 because in normal conditions, the indicators, the flight director display and the FMA indicators are controlled by the number 1 DFGC. On the first officer side, their FMA and flight director are controlled by DFGC number 2, which is why when the first officer is flying, that's what they're going to look at. It's important to It's important to understand that distinction for 2 reasons. Number 1, if there's a problem in the system, you need to be able to switch between them, because this side can certainly receive commands from number 2 with the switches above on the overhead panel over here. But also, the 2 systems can be split and be showing different things. For example, I could be on the ILS over here in the left seat, and the first officer could be in a VOR mode, right? So it's just important to understand that they can be split. For the purposes of the exercises today, it's not going to make a bit of difference. But again, just all in understanding your system. So we've got the DFGS, which is the overall system. We've got 2 DFGCs, digital flight guidance computers, and it's selectable by what the autopilot's going to follow by this switch right here. DFGC 1 feeds the FMA and the flight director over here normally, and DFGC 2 feeds information to the FMA and the flight director on the right side. Okay? Now, the single most important piece of this puzzle in figuring out what's going to happen next is the FMA. That is the Flight Mode Annunciator, otherwise known as the Scoreboard. In the MD-80, it's got its own little panel right here. Other aircraft, the FMA is could be built into the top of the primary flight display. Either way, this is what tells us what the autoflight system is really doing or planning to do. And awareness of the FMA is critical to understanding the autoflight system and flying this aircraft or any aircraft, frankly, safely. Too many times on VATSIM, and I'm sure you all have heard it if you use VATSIM, a controller will ask an airplane, "What are you doing?" Because I asked you to do this, and the response inevitably is, "Well, the autopilot is malfunctioning, or it's doing something strange." It probably isn't. It's probably doing exactly what it was going to do, and an indication that it was going to do that could have been enunciated on the FMA. It just wasn't recognized by the pilot in command. Because remember, you are the pilot in command. And anytime you change a mode on the MCP, the mode control panel, the first thing you should do is to look at the FMA to make sure it's doing what you expect it to do. In fact, when you are competent with the autoflight system of the aircraft you like to fly, you should be able to predict when you make a change here, what's going to happen here. And because if it doesn't, you need to recognize that immediately and take steps to correct it. Now, the FMA is divided up into 4 columns, and we can remember these 4 columns by the acronym TARP. TARP, Tango Alpha Romeo Papa. Get a little closer. So T, the first column is T. It is the throttles. This is what the auto throttle system indicates what the auto throttle system is doing. We also have the active, and by the way, green is active and amber is armed, all right? So right now, the auto throttles are actively in a speed mode and being commanded by the FMS. The A is the armed mode. Right now, I've got nothing armed because we are in a steady state flight. We're not looking to capture an altitude, capture a localizer, capture a glide slope, or anything, right? So it is blank. And if the auto throttle system is off, by the way, this would be blank as well. So that's the T and the A. This is where any of your armed modes will appear. R is the roll mode. Right now, we're in a nav track mode because I have a flight plan in the FMS. And a magenta line, and the airplane is following that nav track. So the roll mode is nav. And then finally is the pitch mode. And right now we are in VNAV level. I've got VNAV engaged from right here on the mode control panel, and it's level. We have a cruise altitude set at 10,000 feet, so it's not climbing or descending to a new altitude. And we're going to talk more about that in a minute. But those are your 4 columns on the FMA. T, A, R, P. Throttle, arm, roll, and pitch. The one sort of technique I think we should cover before we get into the actual exercises, it's what's called top-down. Top-down flying is something that was taught to me when I first started learning how to fly a transport category airplane. And what it basically means is anytime you are given a new altitude or speed, you start at the mode control panel at the top and then work your way down to the FMS. It's as simple as that. So if we're told to climb and maintain flight level 200, which we'll do here in a few minutes, we will go up here and make the change and then come down to the FMS and change our cruise altitude to reflect our new cruise altitude. Same thing with speed. If you get a speed change here and you want to put that in the FMS, you would put it here, then come down to the, in this case, the speed window and make the change there if that's going to be permanent. So top down, changes up here on the mode control panel first, and then work your way down to the FMS. All right. So now that we've got some basics out of the way, the main parts of the digital flight guidance system, the digital flight guidance computers, there's 2 of them, the flight director, the autopilot, the auto throttle system, and the FMA. All right, so we're going to concentrate today on the mode control panel and the FMA for the most part. So here we go. The first demonstration we will do is changing modes and going in between VNAV level and alt hold. So here we are, 10,000 feet. We're in VNAV level mode. We're in FMS speed. So all of our modes are active. We've got nothing armed. The MCP speed window displays the speed that the FMS is commanding because that's what's running the auto throttle system right now. So notice the speed window is 287 knots. The FMS the McDo is showing that the FMS is asking for 287 knots, and also the bug on the airspeed indicator is 287 knots. So it all lines up. Also notice that the pitch profile window, which is right here, indicates 0 because that is our vertical speed being resulting from being in VNAV level, right? We're not climbing or descending. And it's important not to call this a vertical speed window because it doesn't always display vertical speed, and we'll talk about that in a bit as well. But it's the pitch profile window. All right? So everything is lined up when we're in this mode. Now, let's select the Alt-Hold button and notice what changes. We've left VNAV mode, and we are in Alt-Hold mode. But what else changed on the FMA? We are now no longer in the FMS speed. We are holding the speed that is in the window. So when we changed from VNAV to Alt-Hold, it sort of took us out of the FMS and what's being asked for in the McDo, and put us in a mode where everything will be controlled by the MCP. It's important. If the airplane starts doing something you're not expecting it to do, you want to start reducing the levels of automation. And the first step, the most advanced level of automation, is where we were, where the FMS was controlling everything with the autopilot on. The first step is to pull the FMS out of the equation. And by the way, that's also why it's always a good idea to have your heading bug synced up with your current heading. That way, if you totally come out of FMS mode, your plane won't start a weird turn in some direction. So we're not totally out of the FMS because our roll mode is still in nav track, but we're beginning the stages of pulling completely out. In fact, now we're in heading select mode. Now we're totally out of the FMS. All right? So, let's go back into VNAV mode. If we click VNAV, look what changes on the FMA. VNAV level, which is what we would expect because we're at 10,000 feet, and FMS speed, 287 knots, which is what it's commanding. So if we go back to Alt-Hold, here we are. Alt-Hold, speed. We remain in the heading select mode. If we press VNAV, what's going to change? That's right. The throttle is going to go to FMS speed. And the pitch is now getting its command from VNAV level. All right. So hopefully that helps begin to understand what happens when we press something on the mode control panel and how it switches us between the levels of automation of total FMS and then where we're starting to have things controlled by the MCP, because it's important to understand what happens. So we'll go into Alt-Hold mode for this next demonstration, and we'll go. So if we want to change our speed, we can do that while in Alt-Hold mode, and let's see what that looks like. So right now, we're in Alt-Hold mode. Our speed is 287 knots, and that's what the auto throttles are being commanded to hold. Our roll mode continues to be nav track, and our pitch mode is altitude hold, because that's what we selected, altitude hold, Alt-Hold. So let's change our speed. Let's bring it to 330 knots. And look what happens. The speed window starts to show the higher number. The throttles come up until they say ATL. ATL stands for at throttle limit. The throttle limit is set by the TRP, the thrust rating panel. On takeoff in the MD-80, you select climb thrust at 1,000 feet, or whatever your thrust reduction altitude is. So it comes back to climb level, which then sets an EPR limit, and that EPR limit is indicated by the bugs on the EPR gauges. So when we set a new speed, the thrust levers came up to bring us up to that speed, and when it reached that climb limit, it went into ATL. And it's important to know when you are at the limit for the throttles, because it won't give you any more past this limit. And by the way, that's one reason why in the MD-80 at cruise, when you're at cruise altitude, you typically leave it in climb. You do not select cruise, because the cruise EPR limit is much lower. And if you're at a very high altitude, and especially in the MD-82, which has a little less power, and you need power, you need power. You don't want the auto throttle system, wasting time by going to the cruise limit if you need climb. So there's really no, that I know of, practical reason to come out of climb mode during most of the flight. So here we are at 330 knots. Once we get to 330 knots, notice how it comes out of that ATL because the thrust levers came back, and now they'll just work back and forth to maintain 330 knots. Let's do the opposite. Let's spin it down to 280. Notice how thrust levers, throttles come back, and now it says low limit. That's because you have reached the lower limit of the throttles. So the auto throttle system is telling you, I'm at the lowest limit. It's not totally idle. I can reach up and watch. I'll pull them back. Now you're truly at idle, but also look what happens. Your landing gear lights come on. The airplane's trying to tell you you should have the gear out if you're coming back to true idle. So it comes back to something a little bit, we'll call it, I don't know if technically it's flight idle, but we'll call it that. It comes back to flight idle. Now when we reach our speed, our 280 knots, notice the throttles come back up, and now it's going to maintain 280 knots. And notice we're not at a throttle limit anymore, whether it's a high limit or a low limit. Again, it's really important for you to understand what this window is telling you, because there are certain modes, and we'll look at them in a minute, that if you don't recognize you're at the limits, you could get yourself into something of a pickle. And now that we're stabilized at 280 knots, speed is 280, we're still in alt hold mode, and we're still tracking our nav. Make sense? Let's do one more. Let's bring it up to 330. Thrust levers come up till they are at the limit, which is the bug set by the TRP. Speed comes up. And this is a good time to get used to looking at your fast-slow indicator too, because this is indicating that you're slow or fast compared to what you have the bug set to. And you'll see when the fast-slow indicator comes off the slow peg, that's when we come out of ATL, and the airplane will start bringing the throttles back to match the speed. There it is. We are now at speed 330. The throttles are coming back, and we have reached 330 knots. And you can see it, how we're matched up with the bug, but also our fast-slow indicator, right? The object is to get that circle right over the diamond. One more, we'll slow back down to 280. Notice how the thrust levers come back, the throttles come back, until they've reached their lower limit. And now the speed cart is coming back to its new set bug of 280 knots. Alrighty. As we approach 280 knots, it'll come out of low limit mode. Watch the throttle levers here. See how they're starting to move up? It's enunciating now the 280 knots because we're no longer at that lower limit. And they'll come up to maintain 280 knots. All right, excellent. Let's set it back to 300 where we were. And we'll move on to demonstration number 3, which now we're going to start getting into climbs and descents. All right, we're going to learn how to transition from VNAV to vertical speed climbs and descents. And we might do this for a number of reasons. We're going to start with climbs. ATC might ask for a specific vertical speed. They might want us to reach an altitude at a certain time. When we're within 1,000 feet of our altitude, we might want to bring the vertical speed down just for passenger comfort. Any number of reasons why you might need to come out of VNAV and go into vertical speed, but we'll look at that. And it's not entirely different from what we've been doing, just doing it level flight, switching from FMS managed mode to MCP managed mode. All right. So here we are, 10,000 feet, 300 knots, and let's say we've got the FMA tells the story. We're in alt hold, we're at 300 knots, and we are not relying on the FMS right now. So let's say, for example, ATC wants us to climb and maintain flight level 200. We come over here to our altitude window, put in flight level 200, and arm it. And notice how it says now we've got an arm mode to look at, flight level 200 in this case. But notice the plane not climbing yet because we're still in altitude hold mode. We're not in a vertical speed mode. We're still in altitude hold. So top down. First we put it here. Then we can put in the FMS through the McDo. 200. Enter it. Execute it. Again, nothing's happening yet. But if we select VNAV, now look, we're in the VNAV climb. VNAV climb, it's commanding the EPR limit through the FMS. And now we're in a VNAV climb. And we begin our climb to flight level 200. Notice the speed is coming back. It'll work to capture the speed that it wants. And up we go. The pitch profile in the VSI should match up. VSI is 29, about 3,000 feet a minute. And sure enough, the pitch profile window shows that 3,100 feet a minute, 3,200 feet a minute. The FMS speed, we would look to the climb page. Well, we're in the cruise climb. Here it is. And it's coming back to the 286 knots. When you're and the auto throttles are being controlled by the FMS as well. Right? So, when in VNAV, pressing IAS, vertical speed, or altitude hold will put us in a vertical speed mode. So let's press the vertical speed button. And now look what it says. It says our throttles are at the limit. It says which is 286 knots. So in order to maintain this vertical speed mode at 1,900 feet a minute, our throttles are at the limit during our climb here to flight level 200. So the FMA throttle window would change to our speed if it were didn't require the throttles to be at limit. In fact, Yeah, we're right on the edge. See how the throttles are just sort of going back and forth there, almost to the limit. And then the pitch window is vertical speed. If we go back to VNAV climb, FMS EPR. We can also use the pitch wheel, and look, it put us in that vertical speed mode. So if we put it down to 1,000 feet a minute, it is now going to try to maintain 1,000 feet a minute at our selected speed, and notice now the throttles aren't at the limit, 286 knots. Now let's select 310 knots here. Notice now the throttles are at the limit, and it's trying to maintain 310 knots and 1,000 feet a minute. And all the bugs go to 310 knots. All right, let's go back to VNAV. VNAV climb, FMS EPR, flight level 200 still armed, and we'll let it finish its climb to 20,000 feet. Our display's a little cluttered here. Let me get rid of that. Okay. Now, it's important to understand here something to keep in mind. When you go into a capture mode, and we'll see that in a second, because flight level 200 is armed, and in a minute here, I'm not going to change the barometric pressure, go to standard, because we're going to be going up and down here a little bit. It's important to understand, once we're in VNAV capture, like it is now, if we manipulate the pitch wheel, or the altitude pre-select window, or anything up there, we could lose our armed altitude, and it won't indicate it that we've done anything. So, and that could cause an altitude excursion. So you want to be sure, once you're in capture mode, unless you are purposely making a change, you want to stay away from those buttons and let the airplane finish its capture on its own. And accordingly, you want to make sure you're monitoring this, because as we get close, the vertical speed will come down. And if it's still rocketing up at 1,500 feet a minute, when you're getting within a couple hundred feet of your altitude, you know something's not right. So it's all part of monitoring this. We'll let it get situated at flight level 200. And then we'll move on to our next demonstration. And the next demonstration will be just like we did, except it'll be VNAV descents to vertical speed descents. So here we are, level, VNAV level, FMS speed, flight level 200. And notice everything's matching up, 287, 287, 287. Throttles are taking their commands from the FMS. Our roll mode is still on the nav track, and our pitch mode is VNAV level. Exactly what we expect to see at this. ATC says, send and maintain 15,000, and that'll be your new cruise. Well, as thrilled as we would be to get that awful cruise altitude, we spin 15,000 feet in, we arm it in this airplane. Now the MD-80, some MD-80s have an auto arm, but either way, after you spin it, you check the arm window to make sure your new altitude, and you want to say it to your the other pilot or to yourself. I talk to myself all the time when I fly. 15,000 is armed. We go to the McDo. We put in 15,000 feet as our new cruise altitude. Execute it. Notice nothing's changed. We have to initiate the descent. and we press VNAV. Press VNAV. Now we're entered VNAV descent mode. The throttles come back, and the airplane begins its descent. And now we are in, notice we're looking at a new mode, which we see on takeoff as well. And we call it clamp, but it's not CLAMP, it's CLMP. And what CLMP mode means is computer lockout manual power. And what that means is power has been removed from the auto throttle servo, and now we can manually position the throttle. So in this VNAV descent, we are in clamp mode. We are still in our roll mode is here. We're still in VNAV descent mode, and we're at flight level 150. We do not have a profile here because we're not in a stage of the flight that requires a descent profile, right? We're not, the computer's not telling us, oh my gosh, you need to follow this to descend. This is just a cruise change, and therefore we can, the computer allows us to manipulate the rate of descent by going into clamp mode. Notice the pitch profile window shows minus 1,100, which matches our vertical speed. And our speed window still matches what the airplane is trying to achieve of 287 knots. Bugged, window, FMS. And we can, again, in this clamp mode, we could bring the throttles up or back to change our rate of descent if we want to descend faster or slower. So it's not entirely unlike an IAS descent at this point. Let's go into a vertical speed mode. If we select vertical speed on the MCP, look what happens. Just like before, we're now in vertical speed. The airplane is going to work to maintain 287 knots. And notice now it says low limit, meaning the airplane can't pull the power back any further, doesn't want to pull back the power any further. So if you're looking to maintain 287 knots, you might need to change something. You might need to add drag. You might need to bring the throttles back that little bit extra. But right now, it's not in that low limit mode anymore. So we're right at the sort of at the edge of where it's comfortable descending and maintaining 287 knots. It had to bring in just a smidge of power to maintain that speed. As we approach 15,000 feet, what's going to happen? What should we start to see here? If you said alt cap, I think you're correct. We should see the pitch mode go into capture mode because we're still armed. We're getting within 1,000 feet of our altitude. There it goes. Notice, when it goes into alt cap, the armed window goes blank because it's not armed anymore. It's capturing the new altitude. Notice, too, this went into alt cap a lot later than earlier in that climb because we were climbing at a higher rate of climb. So it has a, it computes a good time when to start to level off. Notice our vertical speed is now decreasing. So that's how you know it's truly capturing. It's doing what you expect it to do. And now we're getting very close to our altitude. It goes into altitude hold mode. And our speed is set to the 287 knots because we haven't changed that. And the throttles will adjust to maintain the airspeed, 287 knots. The pitch will work to maintain altitude hold, and our roll mode will continue to track the nav. Of course, we have programmed. same rule goes before. When you're in that capture mode, if you manipulate the pitch wheel, vertical speed pitch wheel, or press Alt Cap or whatever, it will unarm that altitude. It may not enunciate it. So it makes an altitude deviation very likely to happen. All right, we're at 15,000 feet. We're in altitude hold. We're pretty stabilized, 287 knots. The power's hanging out where it needs to. So let's get into why understanding those throttle limits and how they're enunciated are so important, especially if you want to use vertical speed mode. You might think vertical speed mode's a great mode to be in, and it is. However, let's see what happens. Let's set this to 300 knots. Let's let the airplane get to 300 knots here. Power comes up. It hasn't reached the limit. Yep, just short of the limit. I apologize for that sound stutter. I just updated to the new SU3 and I'm getting these stutters. I'm going to have to investigate that. I hope it's not distracting. Okay, here we are, 300 knots, altitude hold. We're not in the FMS right now other than the nav track, the roll mode. We are, our speed and our altitude is being controlled by the mode control panel. I almost called it a GCP, the mode control panel. So let's start a vertical speed descent, and we won't even have to touch the vertical speed button. So let's say descend and maintain 5,000 feet. So we'll set 5,000 feet in the altitude select window, pre-select window, and we'll pull it to arm. 5,000 feet is armed, and we'll use the pitch wheel to roll aircraft nose down, A and D. And we'll go down to 500 feet a minute. So notice we're in our speed mode of 500 knots or 300 knots. Our altitude is now armed to capture 5,000 feet. Our roll mode is still nav track, and we are in a vertical speed mode, and it's commanding 500 feet a minute, and our vertical speed indicator backs that up. So let's demonstrate a very important aspect of vertical speed descents and climbs, frankly. And that is that there is no speed protection when you are in a vertical speed climb or descent. If we go to 3,500 nose down, the throttles will start to come back because it's trying to maintain 300 knots. It is at its lowest limit. And notice how the airspeed is still high. And it's increasing. There is no speed, so you're at risk of an overspeed by doing this. Generally, you do not, the rule of thumb is you do not select a vertical speed of more than 1,000 feet a minute unless you've got some drag on the airplane. So here we are, low limit, speed's increasing. Let's fix this. Let's go to altitude hold mode. Let the airplane stabilize back at 300 knots. I clicked altitude hold. The airplane will level off. We'll let it stabilize back at 300 knots. All right, here we are, 300 knots. Let's let the power stabilize. Should stabilize up around 1.4 1.5 or 1.48, something like that. All right. ATC comes back and says climb maintain 16,000. We put in 16,000 in the pre-select window. We arm it. 16,000 is armed. They say, give me your best rate. So let's go ANU, aircraft nose up, 4,000. Notice we enter vertical speed mode. The thrust levers, throttles go forward. They're going to hit the limit. Bam, ATL. The airplane is pitching to maintain 4,000 feet a minute. Again, it's important to know we're at the limit because now we're not going to get any more power. And look what's happening to the airspeed. The airplane is not able to maintain the 300 knots we need. We are at throttle limit. Speed's coming down. If you're trying to do this, you could enter a stall. The airplane will stall. So you have to be very... Now notice how it went into alt cap very early because of our excessive rate of climb. Oh, the airplane's turning to maintain our nav track. Notice how, too, when I put in the new altitude in here, I did not change it on the FMS. And look how it put 16,000 on the scratch pad. Kind of cool. All right. So now the airplane's leveling at 16,000 feet. We never got super slow. We did get slower than what we wanted because we had 300 knots selected. That's what we wanted. But again, just a demonstration. When you're in these vertical speed modes, you have to be very careful and understand when your auto throttle is telling you you're at a limit, either at throttle limit or at the low limit. So we'll get stabilized here, 300 knots, and then we'll go back to the VNAV mode here, and then we'll wrap up this part of the lesson. Let's go back to VNAV. The FMA changes. We're taking our cues from the FMA. The auto throttle is getting its info from the FMS, and we are in VNAV level mode at 16,000 feet. So let's summarize vertical speed mode, because this is what's going to get you into trouble if you're not careful. When you go into vertical speed mode, you have direct control over the vertical speed of the aircraft. The automation will attempt to give you the vertical speed you're asking for, regardless of what happens to the airspeed. And this is pretty true across many aircraft. So when you're in a vertical speed climb and you see speed ATL, or in a descent and you see low limit, that's the indication that the auto throttles they're at their limits. They can't give you any more or take any power back on their own, so you need to be particularly diligent in watching your airspeed if you're doing that on purpose. We can enter vertical speed mode a couple of different ways, and we did it in a couple different ways. We used the altitude hold button, we used the vertical speed button, and we also used the pitch wheel. And when you're in altitude hold or VNAV level, you can enter vertical speed by simply rolling the pitch wheel. But again, every time I changed a mode, my eyes went immediately here to see that it was doing what I expected it to do. You always confirm your MCP inputs by looking at your FMA. And most airlines, the procedure is when the pilot makes a change to the Autoflight System via the MCP, it gets verbalized by the pilot flying, and then the pilot monitoring verbally confirms the appropriate FMA status. Okay? And let's go over that rule of thumb one more time. You generally do not select a vertical speed descent of greater than 1,000 feet per minute unless you've got drag on the airplane. That's just good operating practice. All right. Let's go to our next exercise, where we're going to start using indicated airspeed climbs and descents. All right. It is a popular mode to go into in these aircraft. But again, it's got its gotchas, and you have to be aware of them. And the first exercise we're going to demonstrate is going directly from VNAV into an IAS mode. And it's sort of an academic exercise because you would not do this in the jet. And we want to do it so we can show you why that's not a great idea. All right. So, let's put 14,000 in the window. Let's arm it. 14,000 is armed. And let's select IAS. Let's say we want to do an IAS descent. Let's select it. Okay. What happens? The FMA pitch window changes to IAS. The FMA throttle window flashes and changes to clamp. The throttles will stay in clamp, and because the auto throttle system will be locked out now, so you can position them manually to control the rate of descent. But look what's happening. Nothing. We've descended, what, 20 feet, 40 feet? If our power at that time happened to be a little high, that's the problem with the flight sim. The throttles are not in the position necessarily that you expect. The airplane could enter a climb, is what I'm trying to demonstrate here. Right? So if you happen to be in a situation when you hit that IAS mode when the auto throttles were up a little bit, because maybe the airplane got a little bit slow, if you try to enter a descent that way, you could, in fact, instead enter a climb. And that could ruin the controller's day. Notice, too, the pitch profile window is set to whatever it was, whatever airspeed we were at when we pressed IAS. That's why we like to call this a pitch profile window and not a vertical speed window, because now our speed is controlled in this window. It's controlled by the pitch wheel, and the climb rate is controlled by the throttles. So let's begin a descent. We had 14,000 in there armed. Let's reduce the power. And notice how the plane now pitches down. It will, it may oscillate a little bit as it tries to find the correct pitch attitude to maintain 286 knots. So again, in IS mode, the pitch wheel controls our airspeed, and our throttles, which we have manual control over now because we're in computer lockout manual power mode or clamp mode, our throttles control our rate of descent. So right now we're descending, what, 1,200 feet a minute? Let's bring it back a little bit more. We'll work our way down to 14,000 feet. And then let's watch the FMA as we capture 14,000 feet. We should eventually see alt capture, right? Thousand or less than 1,000 to go. There's alt cap, and look what changes. The throttle's unclamped because now we're in speed 287 mode. The FMA armed window went blank because we're now capturing it. The MCP pitch window reverts to a vertical speed, what our vertical speed is. And the speed is set to whatever it is in the speed window. And that is now the speed that it will hold. And we had altitude capture, and now we're alt hold. And here we are leveling at 14,000 feet, 287 knots. So, again, let's reiterate the gotcha. When selecting the IAS mode, the throttles immediately go into clamp, computer lockout manual power. Immediately go into clamp, and the aircraft will pitch up or down to maintain that speed. If you're in level flight and you push IAS, the aircraft may begin an unintentional climb or descent. That is why we typically do not enter it, an IAS climb or descent, directly from that mode. But IAS is pretty useful, and there's a really useful feature of it in that we can pre-select a level off speed. And we can do that because, remember, when we're in that climb or descent, speed is controlled by the vertical speed, by the pitch wheel, not by this. The speed window is not doing anything with the auto throttles when we're in that IAS climb or descent, right? Because we're in clamp mode. The automation is pitching to a selected airspeed in that pitch profile window. Okay? The speed in this window and the speed window is ignored until we're back into a one of the other vertical speed modes. And that allows us to set a new speed up. And that's referred to as setting your future speed. All right, and we'll demonstrate that. So right now, we're at 14,000 feet. We're in altitude hold mode. We're still on our nav track mode, and we're at speed 287 knots. So let's show the preferred method for entering that indicated airspeed, climb or descent. And it's by using vertical speed to initiate the maneuver so that the throttles will start moving in the desired direction. So let's say we need to descend at 10,000 feet. We put 10,000 in the pre-select window. We arm it. 10,000 feet armed. We'll roll the pitch wheel. Thousand foot a minute descent. At our speed, at our speed of 287 knots. And as the aircraft pitches down and the throttles reduce power, once we sort of get into our steady state, then we can go into IAS mode. So the throttles have moved. So now when we enter the descent, it's going to stay in the descent. So you understand why that's a good idea to enter from a vertical speed mode rather than from level flight? And our FMS, now that we're in IS mode, we're in clamp, 10,000 feet is armed, our roll mode is still in the nav track, and our pitch mode is that IAS. So let's say ATC says, upon reaching 10,000 feet, slow to 250 knots. Well, let's change our speed window to reflect that. Notice how when we change this, nothing's happening because the autopilot's not looking at this window right now. Speed is over here in the pitch profile window. Our auto throttles are clamped, and our auto throttles control our rate of descent right now. Or not auto throttles, the throttles control rate of descent. So it's pitching to maintain 289 knots. The auto throttles are set for the descent, or the throttles are set for the descent because we used a vertical speed mode to kind of get the airplane stabilized on its way down. And we can change our rate of descent by moving the throttles. We'll kind of leave them set where they are right now. But look, the airplane is prepped with the airspeed bug and what's in the speed window to capture that airspeed once we come out of the IAS mode, which will be at the altitude capture. Let's make it 280 knots. So now that it'll gradually pitch up. We can bring the throttles back to idle. I manually brought them back to idle. The airplane will pitch for 280 knots. And let's watch the FMA for altitude capture. Now look what happens. At altitude capture, the auto throttles go to low limit because it needs to slow to 250 knots, and we already had the throttles at idle because we moved them back while in clamp mode. So we're in capture. Notice the vertical speed is reducing. We're now in altitude hold mode, which is what we want to see. And the airplane is slowing to our pre-selected speed of 250 knots. Pretty cool, huh? So there's a air traffic control said descend and maintain 10,000 feet. Upon reaching 10,000, slow to 250 knots. You can set that all up in advance, so now you don't have to think about it. You just want to monitor it, make sure it's doing what you expect. So here we are, 10,000 feet, altitude hold, 250 knots. We're golden. Again, I want to mention the gotcha, which is if we manipulate the altitude pre-select window, the pitch wheel, after we're in an altitude capture mode, we could lose that armed altitude. All right. Our next lesson. Let's do the same thing, but in a climb. Let's look at an IAS climb. And this will expose us to the use of a new button, which is the EPR limit button. Right here. Pressing this button while in the indicated airspeed mode will cause the throttles to unclamp and go to the limit set in the through the thrust rating panel, the TRP. And we do this to position our throttles for the best indicated airspeed climb rate. Right? Remember, we live in climb mode on the TRP. So in this case, it will go right to that climb limit, which is here bugged. It's the little yellow bugs, orange bugs, amber bugs. So let's say ATC says, climb and maintain 16,000 at 16,000, accelerate to 300 knots. So that's what we're going to do. So just like before, top down. 1.6, 16,000, and armed. 16,000 is armed. Let's set a vertical speed for a climb. 1,500 feet a minute. Notice how the airplane is trying to maintain 250 knots. 1,500 feet a minute. Throttles are coming up. Once we've begun climbing and the throttles have come up, which they have, we can select IAS. And notice throttles are clamped. IAS. 250 knots is what it's pitching for. And that's our modes. Clamp, IAS. 16,000 feet. Now we can press the EPR limit button. And look, we're not at the climb limits. But if we press EPR limit, the auto throttles come right up to EPR limit. And notice how the on the FMA, it says EPR climb, because that's what we have selected here. So we're pitching up to maintain 250 knots at our full climb limit. And up we go, pretty healthily. So let's say, again, they want us to accelerate to 300 knots at 16,000 feet. Well, we can pre-select, because remember, in IAS mode, this window means nothing to the airplane. We're bugged to 300, but our speed is being controlled by the pitch wheel. In fact, there's 250 knots. And our rate of climb is controlled by the throttles. And right now, we have the throttles set to the EPR climb limit. So we're climbing at our speed, 250 knots. We've pre-selected 300 knots. And we've set our future speed. Let's watch for what happens to the FMA at level off. What's going to change? If you said we're going to see ATL at the limit and Alt Cap, $1,000 to go. You might be right. Let's see. Oh, look at that. Alt Cap is our pitch, new pitch mode. Speed ATL at the limit. We know we're at the limit because we asked it to be at the limit before, remember? Our vertical speed is reducing. And look what's happening to our airspeed. It's coming off of our 250 knots. Our pitch profile window has come off of speed and is now displaying a vertical speed matching our VSI. And we're leveling. We've now gone into altitude hold mode at 16,000 feet. And we're about to fly into a thunderstorm. Turn on the radar for a second. Oh, yeah. Pretty cool, huh? We pre-selected our speed. We were climbing at 250 knots. ATC wanted us at 300 knots after reaching. And that's what the airplane did. And notice we're not at the limit anymore. We've come off the limit. And we're maintaining 300 knots. Oh, we're in some rain. As we fly through this thunderstorm. All right. So we're in altitude hold mode. 300 knots. So the next thing we're going to look at, and actually this is our final exercise, and it's a good culmination of what we've been working on. And this is an indicated airspeed descent through 10,000 feet. So it's not unusual to get an ATC clearance while you're above 10,000. to below. And you're being asked to keep your speed up as long as possible. So it would be like descend to maintain 9,000, maintain best forward airspeed. So here's how we can make that airspeed transition through 10,000 while still in IAS mode. Because all too often we rely on the FMS to do that change for us, because that speed restriction is programmed into the FMS, right? The 250 knots below 10,000 feet. And actually, in the MD-80, it's pre-programmed to be 240 knots. So we're at 16,000 feet. We're at 300 knots. We're in our speed mode, our alt-hold mode, pitch-wise. ATC says, descend to maintain 9,000. Best forward airspeed, please. So, just like we always do, 9,000 feet. 9,000 feet is armed. Let's start the descent. We'll start our descent, 1,500 feet a minute. The throttles begin to retard. Airplane nose is down. As the airplane begins the descent, and as the throttles have reduced their power, we can select IAS. And then we can pull the throttles back to idle. So we're in clamp. We're in IAS mode. Our throttles are totally at idle, as reflected also by the fact that landing gear lights are on. And we've begun a descent at 305 knots. Let's say they want us at 300 knots. So again, speed is being controlled over here. And our future speed is going to be 250 knots. So let's make sure that's in the window here. We now have our future speed selected. We're in clamp. We're in IAS mode. We're holding 300 knots. We've pre-selected our 250 knots. It doesn't take much for this airplane to slow down. So, once we get to about 12,000 feet, we'll want to start slowing. Maybe even 11.5. So once we're down below 12,000 feet, we'll use the pitch wheel to start slowing us down, because we want to stay in this IAS mode. So let's start pitching it up. Now, I'm not a fan of yanking it right to 250 knots. Notice how it brings the rate of descent down? This is why I said we probably could have waited to more like 11.5. Because it brings the rate of descent way down. I have a feeling the Leo is a bit more draggy than the real airplane, because in the training materials I have, it says you should start this at 12,000 feet. Or at 13,000 feet, it says. So we will roll it back 250 knots. So now the airplane will maintain the descent, slow to 250 knots, and we've got the speed pre-programmed to 250 knots. Now, it was important to do that because, remember, before it was set at 300 knots. And what we don't want to have happen is the airplane accelerate back to 300 knots on level off, which it will do. Be a bad thing. So we're at idle. we're controlling the throttles. It's in clamp mode. We're still in IS mode. We have 250 knots speed, 250 dialed into the pitch profile window. And now the speed bug's starting to, the fast slow bug is starting to come off the top peg because we're reaching the 250 knots. And there's 10,000 feet. We're at the 250, right where we want to be. Bring our landing lights on. And then watch what happens at capture. What's going to happen? Pitch will change to alt cap. Auto throttles will change to 250 knots. Look at that. Alt cap, speed 250 knots. It was at low limit for a second because I had the throttles pulled all the way back to idle. But because it's capturing, it's reducing our vertical speed, and the throttles are having to come up to maintain 250 knots. All right, so let's summarize IS mode. You have direct and positive control over the airspeed of the aircraft. The autopilot will adjust the pitch of the aircraft to maintain the airspeed set in the pitch profile window. Good or bad, if you intend to descend and you have a lower altitude set into the altitude pre-select window, and you go directly into IAS mode, airplane doesn't care that you intend to descend. All right? So that is why you only enter IAS mode after being in vertical speed mode for a moment, at least, to get the throttles more or less in the position you want them to be. Because the minute you press that IAS button, the throttles clamp, and the airplane will start pitching to maintain the altitude. So while they're in clamp, you can adjust the airspeed with the you can adjust the airspeed in the speed window, and it's not going to change anything. It's going to ignore it until we're back in alt cap. And then we adjust our rate of climb or descent using the throttles. Again, always start with the vertical speed mode, then go into IS mode. And you always confirm your MCP inputs by looking at the scoreboard, looking at the FMA. All right. You know what? Now it's your turn. Get into your airplane and play with these modes. Feel free to fly along with me while I do this, either in the MD-80 or in your airplane, to find out what the differences are, what the similarities are. But get used to being able to come off of the FMS and VNAV and manually control, well, not manually, but controlling the aircraft and the Autoflight system through your mode control panel, glare shield control panel, whatever, the FCU, whatever you call this in your airplane. Because when you're on full automation and the airplane starts doing something you don't want it to do, the first thing you should do is start reducing levels of automation. And that first level of automation reduction when you are fully automated is to pull the FMS out of the equation and start controlling the airplane here. And if that's not working, then you remove the autopilot and just work on the flight director. If that still doesn't work, now you're going to have to go kind of raw data. But do some climbs, some descents, pre-select your level off speed. Get used to going into IAS mode. Do not enter IAS mode directly from level flight. Do it off of a vertical speed mode, and so forth. But play with it, learn it, get used to it, and get to know what's going to happen on the FMA after you press a button on the glare shield control panel. If there's one thing I can impart to you today, it is that. Get to know your system so well that you know when and where that FMA is going to change. And get used to saying it to yourself out loud before you do it. That way, if it doesn't do it, you know something's wrong and you need to investigate a little further. Hey, I really appreciate you sticking with me throughout this lesson. I hope you picked something up. It's been a lot of fun bringing it to you. Any chance I get to fly the Maddog is fine with me. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to put it in the comments below. I always appreciate the feedback. Hey, once again, go ahead and click that subscribe button. More finer points to come. And we'll delve into more subjects. Let me know what you want to hear. Click that like button, click that subscribe, click that notification bell. And this is CJ, your classic jet sim pilot. We'll see you on the next Finer Points. Thanks for being with me today.